Hello, everybody. Our inquiry project is over serial killers and if they are born or made. My name's Brianna Utley, and I'm covering the serial killer Richard Ramirez, and he is also known as the Night Stalker.
My name is Logan Von Hotten, and I'm covering H.H. Holmes.
And I'm Olivia, and I'm covering Dennis Rader or BTK.
So, our essential question is: are serial killers born or made? Our supporting questions are: did they have motives for their murders? How were they treated in their childhoods? Were they violent when they were younger? And how were they caught? So, I did H.H. Holmes, and he was America's first known serial killer. His real name was Hermit W. Mudgett. Holmes claimed to have killed at least 27 people, most of whom he lured into a purpose built murder castle, which included secret passageways, trapdoors, and soundproof torture rooms. And then on the bottom right, there's the picture of the murder castle, how it was seen on the outside. Both his parents were physically and mentally abusive during his childhood, which ultimately led to his inability to form meaningful relationships, his fondness for lying, swindling, and abusing others. And then here is just a timeline of some of his most important events. So as you can see, the first one, that is the date he was born. And then kind of moving along, he went to the University of Michigan Medical School. He then moved to Chicago, and that was kind of where he started his killing spree. And then also where he purchased his property to build the murder castle. And then in 1892, his murder castle was somewhat complete with the 3 stories in the basement. And then also all those years are kind of just when he started killing the family of the Peitzel family. And then in 1896, that's when he was executed. So some of his motives were never really clarified. Some say he possessed mainly 3 goals, and 1 was personal satisfaction, 2 was utmost power, and 3 was financial gain. Childhood treatment: his mother and father were physically and mentally abusive towards him, and then he was also bullied and abused in school. How he was caught: he was arrested in Boston because he attempted to defraud Fidelity Mutual Insurance by using another corpse. So basically, throughout his killings, he would request coverage for non-existent people and then present corpses as the insured. Some of his childhood acts included dissecting animals, and then he also developed abnormal fascination for things both dead and alive. And then that picture in the middle is kind of just a layout of how the murder castle looked on the inside.
Okay, so Dennis Rader would go by the name of Bind, Torture, and Kill. He had about 10 victims ranging in ages from 9 years old to 62, and his methods included binding, strangling, suffocating, and there was one instance where he stabbed somebody. He would use rope as his most popular weapon of choice, or plastic bags, or his hands, and there was one survivor that was able to get away. As a child, he was neglected, and he grew up to resent his mother, and when he was a baby, he was dropped on his head by his mother, and he died for a few minutes and had to be revived. And then here's the timeline of events for Dennis Rader. So on March 9th, 1945, he was born. Shortly after that, we don't necessarily know when, but as a newborn baby, he suffered a head injury, died, had to be revived. His first killings took place in 1974. He had his one survivor later that year in 1974. And then throughout his killings, he taunted the police by sending them letters and poems. He murders another woman, her child escapes. Later on in 1977, he murders another woman and tells the police that he murdered them anonymously. Later that next year, he taunts the police again by sending them a poem, sends a message to the news later on that year, and then he continues to murder and taunt and murder and taunt until he's finally caught in 2005. He's arrested, and then he pleads guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder, and then he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison in 2005. So he didn't have any motives. He mainly picked at random out of boredom. He was laid off from his job when he was younger, and that's what kicked off his killing spree because he was bored and had nothing to do. Again, he was neglected by his mother, who also dropped him on his head when he was a baby, and his father and mother worked a lot on the railroads, so he had no supervision. And again, he was caught because he led authorities on a treasure hunt, and he would send them letters and poems, and he would taunt them. And then one day he sent a floppy disk to a news station, and they were able to track the floppy disk, and that's how he was caught. During his childhood, he strangled and murdered small animals, and he had a fascination with an actress on Mickey Mouse and dreamed of tying her up and torturing her. And there's a few movies about him, the Clove Hitch Killer, and a documentary called A Killer Among Us.
Okay, and my serial killer is Richard Ramirez, which I said earlier is also known as the Night Stalker. And he wasn't active for very long, but he did in just the short, about a year span when he stalked the Los Angeles area, killed about 13 people. Here's a timeline of his major events. So he was born February 1960, and then it goes through a couple of his childhood traumas. He also had 2 head injuries. So one happened in 1962 when he was pretty young, about 2 years old, and then about 3 years later he had another one. And then in 1973 he witnessed his uncle shoot his aunt in the face. His first victim was a 9-year-old girl he killed in San Francisco. And then his next victim was also his oldest victim, was a 79-year-old woman. And then throughout that 5-month span, he continues murdering, raping, and stealing things in California and the Los Angeles area. And then he was heard outside of a house that he was trying to break into by a young boy. And the young boy and his family saw the color of the car and as well as part of the license plate. So it was a stolen car, but that still led to his ultimate capture. And then he goes to visit his brother in Arizona. And then once he comes back to California after that visit, he sees his mugshot like everywhere around the Los Angeles area. And during that day, it was about, I think a day later after he got back to California, a mob noticed him, recognized him because of his mugshot, and ended up holding him captive until the police got there. And then it just goes through some of his trial. And then on September 20th, 1989, he was convicted on 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries, which put him on death row. But he was on death row for about 23 years, and he had never actually been put into the gas chamber like he was supposed to. He actually died of health complications, when he was 53. So I'll go back to my PowerPoint. So the first picture I have is him entering the courtroom, and as you can see in the background, there's a little calendar. And this picture is really eerie because he's smiling even though he is in trial for murdering 13 people. So you can really tell he just really doesn't care. And then the second picture, I chose this because it highlighted his satanic, cult-like actions. He has a, I don't know if you guys can see that, but, oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. Okay. But anyways, it was a pentagram on his palm. And before he left the courtroom that day, he said, "Hail Satan." So he was a very big Satanist. Okay, in his childhood, like I said earlier, he had 2 head injuries. He watched his uncle shoot his aunt in the face. His father was abusive throughout his childhood, as well as his grandfather. So yeah, not a very loving home he grew up in at all. And his motive or signatures, he claims his motive was just to kill. So it's not like he was after one singular type of person or one singular age of a person. He just wanted to kill as many people as possible and torture as many people as possible. Like I said, his victims varied in race and age. So his youngest victim was 9, his oldest victim was 79. So there was really no preference along his killings. And then, as I showed you earlier in that picture, he sometimes left a pentagram as a signature. So he would write it on mirrors, doors, just somewhere. How he was caught, the first clue to him being the Night Stalker was his footprint that was found at multiple crime scenes. And there, if you watch the documentary about him on Netflix, there is a lot more on that footprint. And then once again, another clue was his fingerprint was found on a car he had stolen, the car that I mentioned in that house And then a mob and recognized him in public and held him until the police arrived. And these are our claims. We claim that effective murderers lack the prefrontal functioning that can control aggressive impulses. And another claim is a large number of known serial killers experience childhood trauma and or head injuries.
So a few of our pieces of evidence include H.H. Holmes explaining that he was born with the devil. He explains that I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. So that is evidence for serial killers are born. And then we have a few more that come from the psychology article of medicine that says, I do not believe that the cause of the psychopath's disorder has yet to be discovered and demonstrated. And then right below that explains that there might be another connection to the amygdala and the brain as a link to psychopathy. So we have evidence for both sides, and there's just not enough to be able to make a clear distinction. So what do you think? Are serial killers born or are they made?
And then here's our references for our primary sources as well as any of the other sources that were included in our slideshow. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.